Where'd you grow up? You were in Montana.
I grew up in
correct?
Montana. I moved around a lot when I was a little kid, but I did most of my formative experiences were in Montana. I landed there when I was like 8 or 9, and then I stayed there through high school, and then I left from there to go to college at Northwestern, and that's when I came to Chicago in 1980.
What did your folks do?
My father was a research scientist. At the time when we moved to Montana, he was doing research into the science of forest fires, doing computer modeling of forest fires. It was groundbreaking work. It was really some of the very first stuff like that was being done using large-scale computer modeling for very complex problems like that.
Is he a doctor? What's his background going into something like that?
He worked in the aerospace industry before that. He has several degrees. He has a PhD in aerodynamics, and he had a master's in philosophy, I think, and then he had I think he might actually be a doctor of mathematics as well.
Wow.
He was one of the in the late 50s, early 60s, computer science wasn't its own discipline. So it was always in the math department.
Right.
Instead of the applications for computers, they were concerned primarily with the function of computers at that point. So it was all considered mathematics. And he was one of the very earliest people to program in the language Fortran, which was the earliest complex computer language. And so in the late 50s and early 60s, he was working with computers to do some of the first predictive models of aerodynamic behavior for companies like the Hughes Aircraft Corporation and General Dynamics. And
he's got a philosophy. This sounds like pretty intense intellect to grow up with.
He's easily the smartest person I've ever met.
Wow.
Yeah, easily. And that was a pretty common opinion among people who knew him, especially among his work peers, like the people that worked with him.
Yeah.
Like his reputation was that he always wanted the hardest problem,
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a gene I did not inherit. Yeah.
Well, it seems like there's a little bit of like the math and the mechanics that probably go into what you're doing now. When you got into audio engineering and stuff like that, were you finding yourself sort of just diving into the mechanics of
the audio? Being a recording engineer is a byproduct of me having gotten into punk rock and then being in a band.
Sure.
So those were the motivating factors. I wanted to be in a band. My band wanted to make recordings. Somebody needed to do that. I had a minor technical bent, so I decided that I would learn how to do that.
Right.
I don't have a natural affinity for mathematics. I can do, I can do relatively simple arithmetic in my head. You know, that's not a trick really. And I don't qualify on an academic level as an engineer. I'm not.
But is there? You think there's an aspect maybe of like getting into it and just being like, oh, this is making sense to me, and maybe like motivating. I think like after you get going a little bit. Yeah,
all of the problems associated with audio are extremely logical problems in the analog domain. Any problem that you have will ultimately have a simple solution. Mm-hmm. You just need to find that simple solution.
Sure.
It's startling when you realize that people who've been raised in a computer paradigm where so many of the problems are hidden and baffling because they're a function of misbehaving software, which you can't see operating, right?
Right. And you don't know the language, and you don't.
There's just there's a presumption that problems are kind of intractable or unknowable, right? And I came into audio engineering at the end of the analog era, where everything was still sort of rooted in electromechanical principles, where you trace the wire and see where the wire is broken,
right? Sure,
basically.
Sure.
But that paradigm doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, it does exist on the front end of audio systems, but inside a computer, nobody has any fucking idea what's going on in any of that stuff. There's a drop down menu and it says what value of shadow enhancement do you want on your, or like how many, what
pixels are you looking for?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, and there's no intuitive grasp of any of that. You have to learn the protocols and the language and the hieroglyphics for every single system that you're working on. Whereas in the analog domain, everything is very straightforward. It's all laid out right in front of you. You can follow the signal chain. You can check every contact. You can, there's a logic to it which suits my personality. Like, I like to be able to solve the problems concretely.
Yeah.
And then once they're solved, I don't have to fucking think about them again,